Hi, I'm Conrad Marshall, and from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, welcome to Good Weekend Talks, a magazine for your ears featuring in-depth conversations with fascinating people from sport and politics, science and culture, business and beyond. Every week you can download new episodes in which top journalists from across our newsrooms talk to compelling people about the definitive stories of the day. In this episode, we speak with Jason Arrow, otherwise known as Australia's Alexander Hamilton. The young performer won the role when the musical premiered in Sydney in 2021 and has since gone on to play the titular character in Melbourne, Brisbane, Auckland, Manila, Abu Dhabi and Singapore. He was plucked from relative obscurity to lead the show, which is running in Sydney right now. And hosting this conversation about everything from rising to the most significant challenge of his career so far, to how performers essentially have to give up their life to tour the world in dramatic productions, is the editor of Good Weekend, Katrina Strickland.
Thank you and welcome Jason Arrow.
Hi, thanks so much, Katrina.
Everyone in Australia really knows you as our Alexander Hamilton, the one that we exported to the world. But you were Jason Arrow before you were Alexander Hamilton.
Correct.
Tell us your potted history. You were born in Durban in South Africa and moved to Perth when you were 5. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that transition and your early childhood.
We came from South Africa, showing my age now, it was like 94, 95. So my parents moved because of apartheid. Obviously, it wasn't great in South Africa at the time, especially considering that we're coloured. We're considered coloured in South Africa, which is essentially, for those who don't know, that's mixed race. So they were leaving because it was just incredibly tumultuous there at the time. And, coming here, obviously, that's immigrant status, which again leads into Hamilton, which is quite fun. We'll get to that though. My parents really built up from absolutely nothing because exchange rates weren't great. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have much of anything really. It was just enough to get here and build from there.
And did that aspect of Hamilton, was that the thing that jumped out of you, the immigrant experience, or was it? Tell us what it was when you first saw the musical and heard about it that really resonated with you.
Yeah, the first thing that really resonated with me was the music itself. So I was, being brought up in that community as well, very American music focused. So by that I mean, there was my parents listened to a lot of Motown. So we're talking like Earth, Wind and Fire, Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, that sort of thing, So that's been my upbringing. My sister then segued from that into rap and hip hop. So Tupac, Biggie, Criss Cross, all these big names. Criss Cross wasn't that big a name, but yes, all these big names were a part of my childhood growing up. So I've had a very vibrant musical upbringing, and myself, I segued into lots of other stuff like heavy metal and jazz and classical, and I just sort of went wild for a while. So the music really spoke to me, and a lot of that is in Hamilton sans the heavy metal. It was the music that drew me to it first, and then as I was sort of auditioning and then doing the role. Obviously, when I was auditioning, Disney Plus version hadn't been released yet. So I hadn't actually seen the show in its entirety. I'd listened to parts of it. And then when I found out, the immigrant thing, which is obviously perpetuated throughout the entire thing, I was like, I can relate to that, which has been my life. That was us. Yes. I'm not even first generation Australian yet, so my kids will be. That really did resonate with me, and him being referenced as a Creole bastard, which after some research I realized is essentially the Northern Hemisphere version of what I am racially. So I thought that was quite cool as well. Having said that, I did originally audition for Burr. So
right,
yeah.
Is that because you preferred that character, or?
I wouldn't say necessarily preferred. He's just more my speed. I think a lot of Australians resonate with Burr, actually.
Yeah.
Which is kind of why I auditioned for it in the first place.
And why
I was like,
is
who'll be the
that?
favourite?
Do you think we like the kind of the second best? It's our underdog kind of status, or the...
Well, I mean, if we're talking underdog, technically Hamilton would have been the underdog in that story because of his status. But in terms of personality, I think we are more Burr as a nation. I think we're more like laid back. Our turn will come. Like, we're all about working for our goals, I think, here. But it's more about also waiting your turn. And like, it will happen when it happens, and be grateful when it does. So that's why I think Aussies really resonate with Burr a lot more, which was a challenge at first playing Hamilton, because he is the quintessential American, which is the polar opposite of what we are. So
yeah, that's really true. And I think it struck me when I was watching it again for the third or fourth time last week, that it's very Mozart Salieri, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Like, there's always someone who, if there's a super talent, there's often someone else who's, but for that super talent might have been the one. Yeah. But and the jealousy kind of eats them up.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely that was a really good comparison. When I read that, when you had sent that through, I was like, I hadn't actually thought about it that way, but it really is that.
Yeah, and I do think that underdog thing, I mean, I know at the beginning, yes, it was Hamilton, but as it goes on, he's just the smarter, better.
He also has underdog energy as well. Burr has underdog energy. Regardless of where he was at the beginning, he just has that. Everyone feels like they're against him, and you don't really know. To this day, I still don't really know why. Like, there's no real hard and fast reason. And it's, obviously, historically, it's just a pile of reasons, but you can't do that in the 3 hours that the show goes on for. So it would end up being like 7 hours otherwise. So there's still not like really a linchpin for me where I go, oh yeah, that's why I dislike him. But the way that Callan plays Burr makes him very distant. Like, there's a friendliness at the start, but he has a distance with the way that our relationship works, not between him and the audience, but between him and myself. And that really makes that, like, you go, oh, you're really, really standoffish, which isn't really like us as a nation. We're very welcoming. So I think that was like, that's Callan's expertise there, and like knowing his audience as well and playing into that. So I think he's really smart in doing that.
And it is interesting that you have been Hamilton for the Australian season, so Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, then Auckland, then you went and took it on the Asia tour and you played it in Manila, Singapore, Abu Dhabi. Yep. You have had different people in those key other characters. Some of the other cast went with you, but not all. Lyndon Watts, for example, was the original Burr, and now it's Callan. Yeah. How does that change it when, because it's so much about the energy between you and that other performer? Do you just adapt to that, or how does your performance change?
Have to, yeah, absolutely have to. It's such a huge change. So, for example, the way that it was with Lyndon versus, Callan then took over in Brisbane, so he was Brisbane and Auckland. So I've had like a little pre-date with Hamilton with Callan's Burr. Was so contrasting. Also because Callan at that time had stepped up from being a standby into, so essentially an understudy, into being the role. And so that has a different energy to it, because he's bringing a whole wealth of like different characters sort of into it and still trying to find his on the fly. So that brings an energy to it, which is totally different to how he does it now, I might add. But then when we went internationally, we had DeAndre Woods, who is an American, and wildly different. He was actually a villain. Like the way that it's played in the States versus how we play it here, totally a villain. I think you can really see that they as a nation paint Burr as a villain because historically, and how they say it in school and how they study it and all that sort of stuff, he's a villain because he shot the guy. And essentially, I think anyone who shoots a guy is a villain. So like that's how they've sort of painted it. And he came with that energy. He was unapologetically quote unquote evil. And so in noticing that, I went, oh, okay, so now I can really sort of lean into how we first were discovering Hamilton in Australia in rehearsals in Sydney, because it made more sense. Whereas with Lyndon, it didn't really make much sense to go down that road because he wasn't playing Burr that way. So I had to make micro adjustments throughout the Sydney season. And then when we got to Melbourne, I had a bit of time where I went, okay, I'm going to fully adjust this while we have time and we're putting the show up on its feet. And it changed drastically from Sydney to Melbourne. So yeah, it's about finding those adjustments and finding the ways that people are playing it and how that plays with the audience and how that plays culturally where you are. Like when we went to Abu Dhabi, firstly, we were the second musical that had been there. The first one was The Lion King.
Right.
So
the second musical ever.
Yeah, to have been in Abu Dhabi. So very contrasting shows. Also, like as an audience, not really understanding, music theatre as a concept. I mean, we did it in a stadium because they didn't have a purpose-built theatre. So like it just shows you like how we would have approached the show there in a different context. That it was more like a concert almost. Versus now doing it again and bringing all that knowledge to it with Callan again, who has now just had time to sort of discover his Burr. It's so different again and yet the same. I'm sorry, I hope that made sense.
No, that does. And can we go back to Abu Dhabi? Because I think that's so interesting, particularly given it's in rap and it's fast speaking and, you can follow along, but that's because English is our first language. How was it doing it for, Singapore, Manila, Abu Dhabi, where English is obviously they speak good English, but it's not their first language. Do you have to slow it down or?
No, the show stays the same. I mean, I know that there's a lot. I'm glad that you asked that. There's a lot of there's a lot of like online speculation about the show being slower here. It's not. We're not allowed to. The show has to run the same time that it runs. Like people thinking,
yeah, of course.
Yeah,
can't be 4 hours.
It can't be 4 hours. It can't be longer, and it would be substantially longer if we slowed it down even by 2 beats per minute per song. Like that's a lot of time. And so a lot of people are like, "Oh yeah, it's slower in Australia." I'm like, it's actually not. It's the album is a little bit faster because it's an album. So like that's what. So it's a little, but theatrically between America, between the West End, between us, and every tour, the speeds are the same. There might be micro differences of like a minute or two added on, or if for example, that we're late bringing the audience in or something happens, then there might be a show delay, but the actual timing of the show is exactly the same no matter where you go. So I'm glad you asked me that.
And does that say something about audiences responding without you can still respond without needing to understand absolutely everything that goes on? It makes me think of my friend in Melbourne. Her 11-year-old daughter was obsessed with Hamilton and she had to buy tickets to come and see it in Sydney when it was first on. And I found that so curious because an 11-year-old doesn't really fully understand the story. Is there something in that in a way you can get the overarching story without having to get every single word?
Yeah, for sure. I think the mistake a lot of people make is thinking that it's about politics. It's not. It's really, politics is just the vehicle for the story. It'd be like, again, if we use Mozart's Salieri, right? That would, the vehicle for that would be music.
Yeah.
But the story is still about two people who had a difference in opinion and and had different talents, and one got successful and the other didn't, even regardless of retrying. So that's the story. The story is that, not the politics. If the story was politics, the show would have lasted about 6 months and that would have been it. But it's almost been 10 years now. And then the reason for that, I think, is because it resonates on a personal, human level. Because it's surrounded more about it's more about relationships than it is about politics.
And is it also about hubris? And there's a line in there about flying too close to the sun.
Oh yeah.
Is it also about that the super talent you really can burn out?
Yeah, and that's a modern. That's like a modern fable. These days, tons of people do that, fly way too close to the sun, and then all of a sudden get burnt and get cancelled or whatever. And that's the world we live in now. So yeah, I think it's quite fun to look at that and look at it through a modern lens and understand that we haven't actually changed that much as humans, at all.
No,
so
that's right.
And that was years ago. So yeah, things are pretty much still the same. We just have different methods of delivering them now.
Yeah. If we just go back, we kind of jumped away from your childhood, but I'm interested to hear how. So were your parents, you said it was a very musical household, were they musicians or were they just loved music? And then how did you end up deciding, I know you went to WAPA, the West Australian Academy of Performing Arts. Were you always destined for musical theatre? I know that has a particularly strong musical theatre stream. did you want to be a rock star first, or did you want to be a actor, dramatic actor? How did you get into that?
No, by musical household, I just mean there was a lot of music going around. Like my family's very music oriented. I have like my grandmother used to play the piano, and two uncles played the guitar. Like that was as far as the performance musical, actual like playing it and doing it themselves went. I was the first one to like career pursue it and do it in that means. And that's also a cultural thing. Like it was more of like, you know, get a trade and do this. But my family was very supportive because they came to Australia for the reason of having more options. So they were very supportive of the idea of it. Worried, but supportive. And so, so I was the only one who really followed it professionally. My mum used to also do ballet, so she claims that it was her, but I don't think that was the case.
Right. And were you destined for musical theatre in particular, right from the get-go?
No, I really don't know. Actually, I really found out about music theatre once I went to high school, which was Colby Catholic College in Rockingham. And they had a theatre program there. And so the first time I had done theatre there was Little Shop of Horrors, and that was in year 8. And I sort of went, this is really fun, like really, really fun. And at that time, you're thinking fun. You're not thinking career. You're thinking fun. And so I did that throughout high school as extracurricular activity because I wanted to become a doctor. And I was heading that way until I got to about midway through maybe the beginnings of year 12. And, you know, I was doing all the academics. I was TE, which is what it was called over West at the time, TE exams. And I was doing well for that. You know, I was head boy. Like I was very academic, right? And then I just midway through year 12, I was like, you know what? Actually, I'm not going to do this. I know I'm not going to do this now. I'm pretty much certain. And so I switched to the other stream of study, which was like the non-TE version, the non-examination version. I'm not sure what that is here or now or whatever. And then just finished high school and went to study the certificate at WAPA in music theatre because I'd been doing music theatre, like I did music theatre outside of school after that. And then a few people mentioned this certificate, did that, and then sort of caught the bug like slowly over time. I know a lot of people have been like sort of brought up with music theatre and like that's been big in their family, but it was absolutely not. The most that we knew was Jesus Christ Superstar. That was it. So
yeah, right.
Yeah,
well,
I mean the whole world really knew about that. That was the Hamilton of the 70s.
Yeah. And so then you graduated from WAPA. What did you do between that and auditioning for Hamilton?
Yeah, so yes, I did the certificate. I took a minute to like come over east to audition for some things, just to see because I was very much a tester. I like to test things and see if I could handle, you know, rejection and the industry itself and living basically paycheck to paycheck, which I was doing anyway. But like over, you know, and living by myself, like, you know, living on my own on a different state doing this industry. And I was like, yeah, I can do this. Okay, let's go. So I went back home, studied at WAPA, finished that, and then came back over to the Eastern States and got my first gig, which was with Michael Castle Group, which was Beautiful, the musical, Carole King musical, which I was in the ensemble for and was an understudy. So I covered two roles. Straight after that, I went into Aladdin. The end of the Australian tour of Aladdin, and it was in the ensemble again and understudied Aladdin and another role. And then Hamilton. Hamilton was auditioning straight after Aladdin. Yeah. Like basically we were in Singapore and I auditioned for Hamilton after we had finished in Singapore.
And that's a pretty dream run, isn't it, when you think about how difficult it is to get a musical theatre career up. You were pretty much working from the get-go and then you got the biggest
literally
rollout.
Like that was I expected, like, to show you how much I was not expecting to get Hamilton. I originally auditioned like I was going to go my mind was like I just want to get a cover because that's what I had already done. So I was sort of like here we go. This is exactly what I was talking about before, the quintessential Australian ideology of waiting your turn, right? So like I auditioned for it and said, I'm just going to go for one of the roles because that's what you do. You just go for a role. And I went for Burr. In the thought process of understudying that role, I didn't think I was going to get it because I was like, I'm new to this still. This is my third show. There's no way I'm going to get a leading role, let alone the lead, which I didn't really have interest in at that time. But they had different ideas. They go in and they just put you around to like whatever puzzle piece they need you to be to fit the overall jigsaw of putting the show together. And so when I auditioned the first time, it was Burr. Then they added Lafayette and Jefferson. And then they added Hamilton as well. So it was a lot of material. And I, in my mind, I went, oh yeah, they're basically trying me out to be a cover. And that's all I had in my mind. So when I got the call that I was doing the role, that hit me. That like completely floored me because I was not sure how or why that happened. Because in my mind, I was like, in 5 years, then I'll seriously consider myself someone who should be going for these lead roles because I feel like I've done my dash, you know? No, totally different idea.
Lockdown played a role in your auditioning, but also you opened in Sydney and then Sydney went into lockdown. How was that? Because you get the role of your career, which we know are rare as hen's teeth, and then you have to stop. Tell us how that was psychologically for you and the rest of the cast.
Well, I mean, we finished auditions in the middle of COVID. So it was like we were maybe lockdown 4 at that point in Melbourne. So like we were pretty used to being inside at that point, and getting that information whilst being in lockdown was the weirdest thing I have ever experienced in my life, because you have life-changing news, massive news, but you're confined by a 1-bedroom apartment. It was just really strange. Yeah. Like I couldn't go out like and you know even celebrate silently with my partner Alex, and like her and I like just go out and celebrate that on our own. Couldn't do that. Couldn't tell anyone obviously because it's under embargo, so I can't say that. But I couldn't do anything you would normally do when you get a role. So I'm kind of looking forward to the next role I get and being able to do that, what I could have done with this one, with that one, and sort of live that experience in a normal world setting. But it was very surreal. Like I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but it actually was very surreal to have that information in my head and given to me, and then be like, okay, well, I guess I'll go and fill the dishwasher, or like, you know, like there was nothing else to do. So it's very strange.
And then when you actually started it, how soon after did you go into lockdown?
So we did rehearsals, and that was all very weird because there were still like some social distancing methods that were in place at that time. However, I mean, you know, there's very intimate scenes in the show, so what's the point? Like now that I think back, I was like, that didn't really make much sense. But anyway, it was good that we did it. And then we opened the show in March, I think 21st, something like that. And it was maybe 3 months, and then we shut down again for 4 months. And that was the Sydney shutdown.
And that was 2021. How did you keep yourself psychologically okay, really not knowing when you would go back on, if you would go back on?
Look,
really?
I'm not going to lie. I'm really good at staying at home. So like that, I was like, okay, mentally in that way. The thing that was that made it difficult was the fact that we had been given this huge opportunity to do this massive show, and then it could have easily been taken away from us. The thing that kept me positive about that, though, was that I was like, it's one of the biggest shows in the world. They will not let it fail. So I was like, there's no way that this is going to go away, because they'll easily make that money back. And then if need be, they'll come back. And here we are.
Yeah, right. So you're quite logical.
Yeah, I just approach it logically. And also at the time, I'm like, you know, again, like I said, I'm really good at staying at home and like being a homebody. So like from a personal perspective, I was okay. Professionally, though, I was sort of thinking about it logically.
And did you have to, I mean, you sound like you're very sane. Did you have to help some other people who are perhaps a bit more emotionally fragile in the cast to stay that way? Or did you all just go into your own bubbles? Yeah,
because it was so hectic. The start, like, okay, like, to frame this, in a normal setting, rehearsing a show is very time consuming. It's very taxing. It's like 8 to 10 hour days, 6 days a week. Putting this thing together, learning thousands of lines of dialogue, choreography, going from that into tech rehearsal, which is 11-hour days, 6 days a week, with note sessions, then doing the performance back to back, constantly running it, doing tech sessions where we're standing in the one spot, not saying anything, the lights are being focused on. Like this is a mental and physical drain for those basically. So 6 weeks of rehearsal plus tech, 10 weeks of that in a normal in a normal world setting is insanely taxing. Now to add COVID and social distancing methods on top of that, and having just gotten out of 270 something days of lockdown before that, that's a mental minefield. Like that is incredibly exhausting. So when we got that lockdown at that point, even though we were devastated and had to, sort of think about it in a positive light and understand that, hey, there's no way they're going to let this fail, we were exhausted. So like to even have a little bit of downtime to sort of catch up and be prepared to go back into the show, it was a little and I hesitate to say a little bit of a blessing, because we were getting hit. Like people were getting very sick and like it just was not, we were not surviving as well as we could have in a normal world setting, and that's understandable. So that like first few weeks, I think we all sort of went, okay, like let's slow down for a sec, because that was crazy. One of the biggest musicals opened in the world. And also when we opened, the entire world was looking at us at that time, because Hamilton wasn't happening anywhere else in the world. No other musicals were happening anywhere else in the world. We were on like BBC.
We were the
like,
outlier.
we were on so many different like news channels internationally, theaters back, this, that, and the other. My face was in like this paper overseas, and like, it was wild. So to have a moment to sort of slow down and process everything that had just happened, I personally relished. And I think a few actually did, because when we came back and reopened, everyone felt like they had just sort of locked into, okay, we know what this is now. We're prepared for this, and it's not going to be as hectic as the first time. Let's go.
Yeah, amazing. One of the things that I love about it is the romantic relationships. I know it doesn't get talked about as much, does it? The politics kind of gets talked about, but the relationship with Eliza, but also with Eliza's sister, Angelica, which is, I guess, purposefully vague, right?
It is,
was it a meeting of the minds with Angelica? But tell me your take on the relationship with those two sisters that Hamilton has.
That's the first time I've been asked that.
What does that say, do you think?
I just don't think people think about that part of the show as much, because I think it just gets overshadowed. No, I do. I have to. It's literally, like it's my job. It's a big part of it too. But like I said, I think the relationships and how they work in the show is the most important part of the show. So yeah, I'm very much thinking about those things. So I'm glad you asked it. I feel like pretty much exactly what you said. With Angelica, it's a meeting of minds. And the way that I play it at the start is when he meets Angelica in Helpless, because he meets her first, he's like smitten, he's really like, oh, okay, sweet, I'm going to talk to you tonight because you're really fun and interesting to talk to, and I love that. And so when he introduces her to her sister, I think he's thrown a little bit, but he's not going to be like, oh, okay, like he's not going to, is a young guy. He's going to be like, all right, cool. Then if you're not interested, that's fine. Okay, cool. Let's see where this goes then, and ends up being with Eliza and ends up falling for her in a more like emotional, sense. So I do feel like, Angelica kind of shoots herself in the foot, and she does say that in Satisfied. She's sort of like, I did this. This was kind of my fault. I put you two together.
For the love of my sister.
Yeah, for the love of my sister, because she was like, oh, that guy, and then put herself to the side. So I feel like there's not really an unspoken thing. I just feel like it's a meeting. It's like, when people say that some of their friends are their soulmates, that's kind of what I think it is. That's my likening. I feel like they're like soulmates, but not soulmates in the way that we traditionally understand it. I think they're just on the exact same page. And had it been an alternate reality, maybe, but then it might have been a very volatile relationship. Who knows?
And it's interesting also, isn't it, with Eliza? Like she puts up with a lot, and you feel like that's of the times, and yet you look at modern history, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, just to pull one example. It's not that unusual actually, is it?
No, humans don't change.
The woman would stay with the cad, know. I mean, do you see him as a cad? How do you see him?
I look, I wasn't a huge fan of Hamilton at the start. Like, I was not a massive fan of him. I remember getting it and being like, oh, wow. Like, you know, the lead of the show, like being thrown by that. And then Disney Plus came out and I was like, okay, let's watch this thing. Got to the end of it, turned it off, and I was like, I don't like him. Like, I really, not a fan of this man, but I had to be.
And why not?
I just, you know, like my initial thing was like, dude, just shush, man. Like, why are you? Just be quiet for like 2 seconds and listen to the people around you. And that reaction, I'm telling you right now, that again, that's an Australian reaction. Like, you know, like the loudest American in the room. Like, that's kind of what it feels like. You know, it's just bah. Exactly, the whole time. Just shut up, man. Like, and that's what I felt watching it. And so when I felt that, I went, ooh, I'm not going to be the only person to feel that. I need to think about how I'm going to go about this. And also, you know, like, you know, he cheats on his wife and like, you know, there's just not like, it's just not, he's not great at a work-life balance in the slightest, or like putting other people before himself. However, the way that I ended up finding, I guess, for lack of a better term, a soft spot for him was reading the biography and mostly focusing on his early life. Because when I'm acting and doing stuff, I like to focus on the psychology of it because, I mean, we have a whole field of study that's around the human psyche. And as we've just said before, humans don't really change as a group. So I looked at that. I looked at the early life stuff, and his dad left, even though historically he did still keep in contact a bit, and his mum died, and he was basically in charge of an entire trading company from the age of 14. That right there tells you this man has no idea how to handle relationships at all. Professionally, great. Organizationally, great. Is that a word? Yes. Fantastic. Personally and emotionally, he's going to be very stunted. He's not going to understand how to work that. And it shows. And it shows from the very beginning. You can see he's socially awkward. He doesn't know how to make friends. All he knows how to do is talk about what he knows how to talk about, and that's it.
And that vaulting ambition he can't hide.
Yeah, and he can't hide that because that's all he knew. So in my mind, I went, product of environment. I see.
And then you liked him.
And then I liked him more. I was like, oh, okay. So don't agree, but I don't blame you necessarily.
You've got so many songs and you're on the stage for so long. Is there one bit, because there often is in people's work lives, that is just the thing you have to get over and then you kind of can relax a bit? Is there one song that's the particularly, or maybe not song, maybe scene, that's the particularly difficult bit every night?
Somewhere between me saying Alexander Hamilton at the start and then me getting shot at the end. It's
anywhere.
All of that. Look, I really love and enjoy the show, but when I tell you it is a freight train, it is a freight train. It's a mental game. It's a huge mental game. The thing that I like to say that sort of makes me frame it in a way that's more manageable is I go, all right, let's get in and get out. Let's go in, do a good job and go home. Like, and me thinking like that really takes it from this level of you're playing Alexander Hamilton in Hamilton, you're going to be saying 27,000 words a minute, and it's in front of audiences, and it's one of the biggest musicals in the world, and just boils it down to its simplest form, which is it's my job.
Yeah.
And that helps me get through. But when I
get your job
exactly.
done.
And so when I tell you it is that entire 2 hours, 40-minute show, it's that entire 2 hour, 40-minute show. Like, I need to get through that entire thing before I go, okay, great, sweet, switch off. Because I can't switch off. What
do you do? Do you have a thing that you do when you go off stage at night? Do you go and have a cup of tea, or do you go and have a whiskey?
Not as much. Like, I used to sort of like just watch TV to like veg out a little bit, but not anymore. The show is so in me now that it's not really mentally destroying me in that way. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, not that it was before, but again,
you're match fit.
Yeah, like I'm sort of like, okay, it actually is this thing of go in, do a damn good job and go home. Like, that was like, as you know, or to the best of my ability and go home. And that's actually what it is now. So I think the years of me sort of framing it like that have made it this really manageable, bite-sized piece of a show in my mind that I can do day to day and day to day and not feel like destroyed at the end of it. At the start of the run of doing Hamilton, that was a different story. Like, it was very taxing because there's no scene where I'm just on stage standing around. There's like 2. Sit down to hear Eliza sing That Would Be Enough when I get home from being sent back from the war. And that is it. That's the only time I'm on stage and not doing or saying something. So that's a lot of time. Like, I think we timed it at the end of the Sydney season. I spend a total of like, what was it, like 18 minutes and 33 seconds off stage. So that's a long time to be in that space, constantly on. The mental load of that is really huge, but I love it. So.
And is there anything in this return season that's unexpected to you in how you have recast it or how you've kind of taken it on?
Yeah, it's really funny. Like, it's really funny this time around. Like, there's so much banter and play between the characters and the way that we're portraying the characters, that it just feels really a lot more buoyant than it did. And that includes literally us doing it in Singapore 3 months ago. It's not like a change that's come in over time. It's just something that with this group of people, because we're literally all mad, is like just the way that the show comes out. And it's really engaging in like it's fun in a good way. So when it's light, and so when it's dark, it's dark. And that light and shade is so important. That I've been trying to trickle that in for years, essentially. And you get a little bit of pushback because that's not necessarily the way that the show is quote unquote meant to be. But I think it works better here. I think it works like that. I think it works well here like that. We are we're a buoyant nation. So I feel like we respond to buoyancy. And when it is like that, the audience eats it up. So that when you get to those emotional moments, you get to those moments of like infidelity and like, death and all these things that happen, the audience feel it. They really feel it because they've gone the highs of highs and the low of lows, not like the medium of mediums and the low of lows. Like we're really showing that contrast in this version of it. And that's really enjoyable for me from an acting perspective, because now I'm really getting to like show a full scope of things that necessarily wouldn't have made sense before. And it would have looked like I was just taking the piss. Yeah.
Final question. This season of Hamilton ends in early January, this Sydney season. What's next for Jason Arrow after that? Would you like to keep performing it, if it tours elsewhere in the world, or are you ready for something new?
I always said that I was going to do it up until if we did a return season to Sydney, because early on that was sort of being whispered about. So in my mind, I went, okay, I'll do up until then and I'll be done. And then I didn't quite quantify that would be 4 years, but I just didn't think about that. So now that it's actually come to that, I think firstly a break for sure. If the show does go somewhere else, I'm not sure that I would necessarily want to do international again. If it did go internationally, that would be quite taxing to travel again. I would, however, not mind doing it on the West End as a cherry on top of the cake.
Note that, Lin-Manuel Miranda. Thank you, Jason. It's been fantastic talking to you, and you do an amazing job.
Thanks, Katrina.
4 years on, you haven't lost it, and it sounds like you're having more fun. So
absolutely.
Keep going.
Thank you. Thanks, Katrina. Appreciate it.
Good Weekend Talks is brought to you by the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Subscriptions power our newsrooms. To support independent journalism, search Subscribe Sydney Morning Herald or The Age. And if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe, rate and comment wherever you get your podcasts. This episode of Good Weekend Talks is produced by Chi Wong. Editing from Conrad Marshall. Tom McKendrick is head of audio. And Katrina Strickland is the editor of Good Weekend.